Hello and welcome again to the FASA Leadership Lounge. I am Michelle White and have the honor of being Executive Director for the Florida Association of School Administrators. And with me,
Hi, I'm Jessica Janasiewicz, and I serve as FAFSA's lobbyist as well as the lobbyist for a number of school districts here in Florida.
and Jessica, we have just finished week 3 of the
Woohoo!
legislative session here in Florida. We're so excited and really want to cover a number of topics this week that are nearing that final committee hearing and moving to the floor.
Absolutely. And we also want to say congratulations to the Florida School Boards Association. They had a great legislative day here this past week, and we are happy to have them all here and get to see so many board members here advocating for their school districts.
It was great to see so many of them in committee and, just around the Capitol this week. So, okay, well, let's jump into some of these policies that are moving. First, let's talk about a not so great transition, but transition about school board term limits and county commission term limits. So the House has a joint resolution number 679 that, if approved, would become a ballot amendment for the voters in 2026. It does have an identical companion in the Senate, Bill 802, and both of them are kind of getting this late start in their committees. They both passed this week out of the first committee. They each have a couple more stops before they head to the floor, but it would limit them to 8 years for their term limits. And we've seen this policy in the past, so it's kind of coming around again.
Yeah, in case it sounds a little confusing to some folks that have been following, we did pass this, so it's in statute. But the difference between this and what they're proposing now is this is, as Michelle said, this would go on the ballot, so then it would be part of our Constitution. And obviously, when something's in statute, it can be changed. When it's in the Constitution, it's there. So
Yeah, absolutely. And then we had some great committee meetings as well, some sparks.
we did have some sparks. We had some exciting committees this week. The House Education Administration Subcommittee had a lot on their agenda this week, and they nearly ran out of time as they were going through all the bills. One of the bills that we've been following that they discussed was regarding middle and high school start times. And we've talked about that. That was a policy that was passed a number of years ago that would have said essentially elementary school has to start first, then middle, then high. Obviously, there have been concerns across the state because we have a number of districts where that just doesn't work for a myriad of reasons. It could be transportation, it could be dealing with traffic patterns if you're in a big city. There's all sorts of reasons that this may be difficult. Well, the House had not taken up the bill until this week, so we were excited to see it on the agenda. And they did have an amendment to their bill, which essentially said that if a district submits to the Department of Education before 2026, July 1st of 2026, a report that just explains why they would not be following this policy, why following this policy would be a challenge for the district, and just lists those reasons, then they would be considered in compliance and would not need to change what they're doing currently. So this report does not have to be necessarily approved by anyone at the department. It just needs to be submitted and they have it on file. That was the House's amendment. It did pass in its committee, and it has one more committee on the House side. So it's moving along now that it finally got the hearing, which we were happy to see. And the Senate version of the bill was also heard last week. We were interested to see if they would follow suit with this amendment. They did. So now the bills are identical, and the Senate bill is ready for the floor. So they are now moving along. I expect we'll see the House bill get through its committee and have that bill pass relatively soon. As you were mentioning, there were some sparks flying in that committee as well. And that was when they took up the discussion of House Bill 1483, which looked at school grades and our grading formula. Essentially, it would have changed what we have right now as the current standard for what it means to be an A, a B, a C, et cetera school, making it more challenging. Obviously, there were some concerns there from members who expressed that when you change the rules and parents don't necessarily understand, there might be confusion from parents if they say, well, I thought my kid was in an A school and all of a sudden it's a C school. What happened? And then you say, well, the metrics changed, but nothing really changed about the performance. That could be quite confusing, as you might imagine. There was lots of discussion, everything from teachers and parents and members with concerns. The bill took up quite a lot of time in committee. It ultimately did pass. It does have other committee stops, two other committee stops. And perhaps the most important fact is there is not a Senate companion at all. So that generally means it's dead on arrival because there's really nowhere to put this piece of legislation. But as we know from our experience, Michelle, nothing is dead until they sine die. So we will
So
continue to watch
true.
it.
That is so true for sure. Well, let's talk about another area that kind of got our House members talking a lot, which was in our pre-K through 12 budget subcommittee, and they had a number of presentations. The one that I want to talk about most is around vacancies that are at the Florida Department of Education and the Division of Early Learning. And just for clarification too, the DOE and its divisions are not the only agencies that the House has called to talk about vacancies. So they are trying to figure out what vacancies are there in our state agencies and how can we determine their appropriate staffing allocations. But the numbers were interesting. So within the Division of Early Learning, they noted that there were 6 vacancies right
Mhm.
now and they are working to fill those. So that is a good piece. The FDOE as a whole, not including the Division of Early Learning, had over 100 vacancies. And the looks on some of our House members' faces were a little bit of surprise.
Mm.
But they did talk about the fact that the hiring process could take up to 3 months for a number of positions, depending on the background checks and all of the things that have to go through routing and approval for someone to be hired at the department. But they also noted that most of the positions they have taken some sort of action. So they're either open and advertised as a vacancy and they're collecting applications, or they're reviewing applications, or they're vetting candidates already. But there are about 48 positions that are not currently even being advertised. So it is a potential that the House might look at some of those numbers and figure out if those are actually needed within the department. There's certainly expectations of doing things similar to private business, and we know that government does not work in the same way, and that hiring process looks very different. But just the department was also able to talk about some challenges for certain positions that they have open for an extended period of time. So,
Sure. Another topic that we know that we have been thinking about and is I'm sure been on the minds of all of our members is chronic absenteeism. And truly, since COVID, we've just seen all across the state and the nation a major uptick in those students who are chronically absent. The legislature has not. It has not gone unnoticed by our legislature. And this year, we actually do have some bills that deal with this. There was some conversation last year, but we never saw legislation. And this year, we have this this week we actually heard, or this past week rather, we just heard um, House Bill 1367 from Representative Booth, who actually is a former school board member out of Osceola County. And her bill looks at the State Board of Education creating a rule about with regarding a statewide attendance policy. So one of the things that you've heard discussed is that we almost can't compare the data that we have about absenteeism across the state because every district has a slightly different policy about what's excused or unexcused and all of those types of things. So this would have a statewide policy developed by the State Board of Education with specific definitions for things like excused absence, unexcused absence, what actually is being chronically absent. Is that 10 absences in a row, 15 absences a row? This way we'd have some definitions from the state level. And then, of course, it would require the districts when they create their attendance policies to make sure that they're in line with whatever the department creates as part of this bill. This bill does have two committees remaining, so this was its first committee stop. On the Senate side, there is a bill that's been filed. They are similar; they're not quite identical, but in spirit, they're very similar. It has three committees, and it has not been heard yet. So we will have to see what happens with the bill on the Senate side, but at least we know it's definitely part of the discussion that we all continue to have about what can we do to try and ensure that we're getting these kids, particularly the ones that are missing just excessive amounts of time, are coming to school to learn.
Absolutely. And we know that, especially for our school based leaders, that is definitely a challenge. Not that our district level leaders aren't thinking about it,
Mhm.
it's just on the ground in the
Sure.
work every day, trying to work with parents and communities to get those kids to school.
Mhm.
So, another pair of bills, really, that our school based leaders will have to
Mhm.
think about. One is on electrocardiograms or an EKG or ECG for student athletes. And really, so both the House and the Senate bills, 1135 and Senate Bill 1070, would mandate EKGs for all students participating in FHSAA sanctioned sports. So now we're talking about this requirement specifically for high schools in both public and private, and that students would have to have an EKG prior to participating, and then parents could opt out if
Mhm.
they want to. It and again, supporting those parent choices and giving them that option, but it would mandate it for them. And our schools and probably our athletic directors would most be responsible for tracking that information and who has one.
Absolutely.
And then the second bill is around having AEDs on school campuses. So this is a bill that has been filed and would require each school to have an AED on campus, as well as at least one trained staff member on how to use it. It would also require our students to take a first aid course, including CPR, once in middle school during a health class, and then once again in high school during a class as well. And so the Senate bill just barely had its first hearing this last week. It has two more stops. The House, it hasn't moved yet at all. But more to come, certainly, on that.
Absolutely. And kind of going along those lines of keeping kids safe and healthy, we also have some school safety bills that are out there this year. Uh, for our purposes, both of the bills contain provisions that are providing clarity about those locked doors and gates and when that needs to occur. Because with the legislation that had passed, it wasn't clear if that was supposed to be any moment that a student was on campus, which is the way it was being interpreted by many districts, or if it was just during instructional time. The bills would clarify that it is in fact during between all times of supervision, which for in most cases, I think for school districts, it's about 30 minutes before school and 30 minutes after, and of course the time in between. The House bill was heard this week, passed unanimously out of committee. It has two more to go in the House. The Senate bill is on the agenda for week four. And after that, it will only have one committee remaining. So they are both actually moving along. You may have noticed from some of what Michelle and I have been sharing, there are a number of bills that are just moving in the House or just moving in the Senate, but school safety is one that seems to be moving in both. So that's great news, and hopefully we'll get that needed clarification so that it's very understandable for all the districts about what we need to do to make sure we're implementing that policy correctly.
Yeah, and I think that those topics in particular around safety was one that we knew
Mhm.
was going to be a topic this year. In fact, when we had early meetings with some of our legislators, they were like, "Let me guess what your priorities are." And everybody would guess that. And of course, school safety is always a priority for FAFSA, and we absolutely want to make sure that our kiddos are safe. But we were able to talk with them about school safety when our members were here for our Advocate conference. They were able to share in school experiences about safety and the locking of doors and gates and what that has meant for our very different campuses across the state. So let's talk about ESE students
Mhm.
and support for them. There are a number of bills, and I highly encourage you to head over to the FASA website and look at the full list of the 250 plus bills that we're
Mhm.
tracking through this process right now. But in particular, House Bill 127 and Senate Bill 102 establish micro credentials for students with disabilities that in hopes will help them with employment opportunities once they graduate. So The Senate is ready for the House floor. That has passed all their committees. The House version still has two committee stops to go. They've just barely gotten started on that. So we're working our way through the process. I think that would be a really interesting bill to see come out the other side and how we can help students.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as we've wrapped up week 3, that we are now a third of the way through the legislative session. It's of course a 9-week session. Typically, we think of the final 3 weeks as being mainly budget and then passing bills on the floor. So this this middle period here, week beginning with week 4, is really crunch time for a lot of bills. So if bills have not been heard at all, this is the time that they really have to get going because we're running out of time for those policy committees. Because once we get started with the budget, those policy committees will stop meeting, and then we will just be having those budget meetings and, of course, floor time to pass those bills. So we'll know a lot in the next couple weeks about what will probably at least be making it to the floor as we get where some of these bills just won't stand a chance if they're not heard in the next week or so.
Yeah, and so just a reminder for all of our FASA members, our news tracker that comes out on Monday mornings has a full calendar of what is to come that week. It will also include any bills that are moving and just highlights and links where you can go and actually read the bill text, which we highly recommend because it's also a great way for you to provide input back to our association.
Mhm.
We love it when you give us some feedback that we can directly go and talk with our legislators and staff at the Capitol about. So please be engaged with us. That kind of wraps our update for this week. And again, I encourage you go to FASA.net, click on the advocacy section, and know that there's a full list of bills there ready for you to peruse and share more about. And we'll talk to you next week. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
I love it.